Shenhar versus Braun Duin.
Well, we're going to take a look at opening hands. This is going to be Esper decks on both sides, so the hands might look a little bit similar as we make our way through the course of these games. Teferi is going to stay on top, it looks like, for BBD, which is not much of a surprise. It's an incredibly powerful card, but Shahar is going to start things off with a Watery Grave that enters the battlefield tapped, and Brian will mimic exactly that.
Yeah,
so we will head back over to Shahar.
Shahar's opening is very strong here.
Yes.
A pair of Thought Erasures and an Absorb. The Thought Erasure allows him to just pick off Hero of Precinct 1 before it gets a chance to come down if he chooses. He could also get rid of the Teferi, but yeah, he's going to go ahead and just take the one card that can currently slip under his counter magic and allow BBD to get a foothold on the game.
Kai's Wrath is the card that's going to actually go to the graveyard from the Surveil. Brian going to play a Glacial Fortress and pass the turn back over to Shahar. Lands aplenty here for Shahar, along with another copy of Thought Eraser and Absorb. So he's just going to leave Absorb up right now. Brian picking up a Hallowed Fountain for his draw step on turn 3. Drowned Catacombs will come down, and we head back over to Shahar. The early stages of this game, Brian, is just going to be a lot of lands and passing back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, these decks are largely defined by their sort of mid-range, late-game plans. The really defining characteristic of Brian's deck is the Hero of Precinct 1, giving the ability to snowball early if it gets down and sticks, and allows you to kind of take the game by control that way. And BBD is going to try and play the Sorin with the threat of getting the hero back, but Shahar does have Absorb to stop that. However, Shahar does know there's Teferi there as well. He however, has his second copy of Thought Erasure that he held for, turns out exactly this. And does pick up a second copy of Absorb as well. So to be able to take the Teferi out of action and then still have Absorb, even if Brian is able to find another threat off the top.
Do a little surveilling. We'll see Shahar play a land here in just a moment that will likely enter the battlefield untapped because his life total is not under duress. Brian with a huge top deck here into Teferi Time Raveler. It's actually going to give him a little something to do. It's unlikely to resolve because of the Absorb that is in Shahar's hand. And there's no guarantee that Brian actually even wants to play it right now. Might instead try to go with Hostage Taker just to get something going on the battlefield.
Yeah, one of the really interesting thing about Teferi Time Raveler is that you can use it as a absolute must counter test spell, because we often refer to as test spells as something that you might want to play that your opponent figure out, do you have counter magic? If you do, maybe you'll use it on this. Teferi is the absolute best case scenario of that, because if they don't, well, they can't have another counter spell.
Correct.
As long as Teferi's in play. They also can't remove Teferi at instant speed, because Teferi absolute locks their ability from being able to actually interact with it outside of their own turn. But Brian does decide to fire it off this turn, and it will get answered by an Absorb. And another Absorb is drawn by Shenhar. And there is a Hostage Taker on board, but that's just 2 damage a turn. That is not going to add up nearly fast enough for BBD to close this game before Shahar can find something. So BBD also is sort of in a position where he needs to draw multiple big threats thanks to the Absorb already in Shahar's hand.
A couple of lands here for Brian. He's going to keep attacking with the Hostage Taker, a card that has a very high ceiling in certain matchups. This is not one of them, unfortunately, for BBD. It's just going to be a 2-3. And you see Shahar does have a copy of Kai's Wrath in hand. He can get rid of this Hostage Taker at his leisure, but right now Shahar's saying, you know what? I'll take a couple hits. I'll take a couple draw steps. I found something that actually matters here in Teferi Time Raveler, so you know what? Let's make you pick up that Hostage Taker. I'll draw myself a card, and we'll take care of the Hostage Taker temporarily that way, as mortifies the draw step here for Brian.
Yeah, and interestingly, just that Teferi, it comes down, it sort of slows things down a little bit, and also prevents BBD from being able to cast any of his counter magic. If he had drawn Absorb this turn, say Shahar picks up some sort of haymaker in the form of Teferi, his other Teferi, or say a Search for Iskanta can come down, no threat of counter magic.
Brian does have that Hostage Taker back on the battlefield here, but again, take a look at Shahar's hand at this stage of thing. Moment of Cravings, an Absorb, a Vraska's Contempt, and now Kai's Wrath is just going to trade 1-for-1 with the Hostage Taker. Again, Kai's Wrath would destroy everything that's on the battlefield. Everything is just one creature right now. Going to make sure that Teferi Time Raveler still stays and does its thing. And its thing at this stage of things is plussing so that Shahar can play sorceries at instant speed on his opponent's turn, which may come up at some point in this game as a swamp is the draw step.
I think most importantly, Teferi ticking up allows him to just use its minus again and get an additional card, bounce an additional permanent. BBD, he is just sort of flooding out here. One of the major differences between these two decks in terms of this style of matchup is that Shahar's deck has Chemister's Insight. Braun Duin's deck does not. So this sort of situation, if a player draws Chemister's Insight, it's exceptionally powerful to allow them to get rid of some of the weaker or there it is. As if on cue,
speak of the devil in a
Shahar
shop
finds a Chemister's Insight that will allow him to dig deeper into his deck. It also allows him to exchange the Glacial Fortress's hand later for another 2 cards. and finds himself Teferi, and now he's off to the races.
And if one Teferi was good, a second one is very good. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, the more powerful of the two. This is a multi-format staple, but it's definitely going to be very good right now. Teferi Time Raveler here for BBD is going to try to resolve. We'll see if Shahar will let it. Again, looking at a hand of Absorb and Dovin's Veto.
The thing about this, like as we mentioned before, this is the ultimate test spell. Well, if you don't counter this, you can't counter anything. So, if BBD had, say, Liliana Dreadhorde General that could come down now, or if he had his own Teferi he could play to tuck the other Teferi, you're stranding your all of your instant speed spells in your hand as long as that remains in play. So Dovin's Veto does end up stopping it.
So it makes this matchup pretty difficult for Brian. As you see Shahar starting to run away with this one a little bit, up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards in hand. Could be more if we jumpstart a Chemist's Insight, which we are. And there's a copy of Narset that's going to join the fray here in just a moment and tick down to add another card to Shahar's hand. Is right now, if you're Brian, you're trying to think, and you should be at home as well, is what is the best card that Brian can draw this turn? In every card of his deck, what is the best thing that he could draw, and could Shahar answer that? The answer, that's up for us to decide. I think it would be Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Shahar has an answer for that. Well, multiple, in 2 copies of Vraska's Contempt and Absorb. The later these games go, the worse it's going to be for Brian, and when we get to the sideboard portion of things, I presume we're going to see him shift his deck dramatically.
Yes, we do see the Mortify can attempt to take care of the Search for Iskanta, and the fact that the Teferi Time Raveler is in play means that there's no possibility for Brian to counter back, even if he had it. Does have D-Spark to take care of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. That does mean that Search for Iskanta, though, is going to flip. And now, just lots of opportunities for Shahar to go digging through his deck to find more action. There's another Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and this is, like you mentioned, a situation where BBD could probably pick the top cards of his deck and there wouldn't be a way out.
Yeah, and that's what makes the Esper control deck so good, is that once it actually gets its footing and is able to start activating its various card advantage engines, be it Narset, be it Teferi Time Raveler, be it Teferi Hero of Dominaria, or even a Search for Iskanta that transforms into Iskanta the Sunken Ruin, then it's just too much to come back from, because as you can see in Shahar's hand, we've played a ton of turns. How many cards does he have? 7. Might have enough to discard for his turn. Brian has a Glacial Fortress, and he gets to draw a card per turn. So the world is Shahar's oyster here. Unfortunately for Brian, this game is not going his way, but again, he is going to change his deck dramatically after sideboard. I have to imagine he's come prepared for this matchup, but game 1 is looking good for your 2-time world champion.
Absolutely. This is sort of all over except the crying, scooping, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, the formalities, as it were.
And it is worth noting that this version of Esper Control that Shahar is playing really only has the Teferi emblem and Liliana as effective win conditions. You're going to either kill your opponent with a horde of zombies, or they're probably going to concede because you just have them locked up.
And that's really one of the nice things about Esper, right, is you don't really have to play very many win conditions. Esper Control, that is. Esper Midrange has to play Hero of Precinct 1 and Thief of Sanity and maybe a couple other odds and ends. But one of the nice things about Esper Control is that Teferi is its own win condition in and of itself in most matchups. And you throw in a Liliana, and all of a sudden, okay, I've got things taken care of. The goal when you're playing Esper Control is not die in the early stages of the game, because the longer we go, the better it is for me. And me in this instance is Shahar, and he is looking real good this game.
Yeah, I mean, 7 cards in hand, 2 Chemist's Insights in the graveyard, 3 Planeswalkers, Iskanta the Sunken Ruin, another Search for Iskanta in play. This is like the embarrassment of riches. There's Liliana, so finally a way to actually do something other than generate advantages.
Yeah. One thing that's actually been added to this Esper Control deck, too, that kind of, in a weird way, acts as a win condition, is Oath of Kaya. And I'll mention that card because Oath of Kaya has the unique ability to actually deal 3 damage to any target. Any target could be BBD's face right there, as he doesn't look as confident as he once did in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, I suppose.
He's just so steely-eyed.
I know.
Through all this.
Through these 4 Planeswalkers and a handful of cards, he's doing just fine. But the ability to actually play Oath of Kaya, deal 3 damage to your opponent, return it to your hand with Teferi, or return it to the top of your deck with the other Teferi, you get some interesting interactions there where you can just deal your opponent 3 damage over and over and over again. But Liliana will play cleanup duty this game.
Yeah, Liliana comes down, makes a zombie. Teferi just continues to generate more card advantage alongside that Iskanta as well.
Big draw step.
Finds Teferi.
You want to mention this interaction here?
Oh, yeah. The tick up from the Teferi Time Raveler allows Shahar to use the Thought Erasure during Brian Duin's draw step to force him to discard the Teferi before he even has a chance to cast it. That gets the concession.
We will take a look now at BBD's sideboard and the cards he's going to bring in, and more importantly, the cards he's going to take out, like Enter the God Eternals, which doesn't really have any targets here. Hostage Taker, again, doesn't really have any targets here as well. So you're going to see some exchanges for some bad cards that don't really interact well against a control deck. Those are going out. Some good cards that actually interact well are going in, like Dovin's Veto. He's got 4 copies, Duresses as well. So he's able to change his deck to be a little bit better. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's certainly better than his game 1 configuration.
Yeah, crucially, he does have those Narset Parter of Veils, which are cheap cards that he can play that give him a persistent advantage over a couple of turns. The fact that the Narset's passive ability, prevents your opponent from drawing multiple cards in a turn is very powerful in this matchup. It stops the card draw from Chemist's Insight. It stops the card draw from Teferi, Hero of Dominaria.
Yep.
It stops the card draw just from any additional source. It doesn't stop the Narset itself because it's not an actual draw effect. It doesn't stop Search for Iskanta, but it really can come down and because Shahar does not have any creature-based way to deal with it outside of, it looks like he'd bring in his own Thief of Sanity, only a couple copies. It really puts a lot of pressure on him.
Now, you're going to note that Shahar is boarding out his Kaya's Wraths first. We're looking at a deck here from Brian that doesn't have that many creatures to begin with, but also is converting to a very Planeswalker-centric strategy after sideboard. So Kaya's Wrath, not ideal there. He's going to want to make sure he leaves enough answers in his deck to be able to take care of Hero of Precinct 1 and Thief of Sanity. But this is where BBD actually gets a little bit of an edge here, because you get to say, all right, well, Shahar, you have to walk the tightrope of being able to deal with these creatures and have that configuration of your deck, but still be able to do your thing. And as we know, and we've seen already today, if Hero or Thief of Sanity live for a couple of turns, it's bad news.
Yeah, though, I mean, both players kind of have to do that same dance here because they do know each player's list. They are fully aware of what is in each player's deck and sideboard. And the existence of Thief of Sanity in Shahar's sideboard means that if Brian decides to take out all of his creature removal, well, Shahar could just play a turn 3 Thief of Sanity and run away with the game.
Absolutely. So it's a little game of cat and mouse here between the two players, all based around Thief of Sanity because it is so incredibly powerful. Pardon me. Just one hit can change things in a very, very big way. So both these players are going to go back and forth in the sideboarding. They are bringing in similar elements, and their decks do look a little bit similar after sideboard. They are both Esper colors, of course, but you see Shahar is taking his time with the sideboarding because these are difficult decisions. I do think, Brian, that game 1, Shahar is pretty heavily favored. That game, I think, is going to play that way a lot. Maybe not to that extreme, but I think it will go that way quite a bit. However, I think after sideboard, things get pretty good for Brian. Now, this is an interesting hand because you've got these lands that are going to enter the battlefield tapped a bunch in Drowned Catacombs and Glacial Fortress, but you've also got 3 very powerful cards in Teferi and Thief of Sanity.
Yeah, any land that comes into play untapped allows you to play a turn 3 Thief of Sanity, which is quite strong, though looking at Shahar's hand, we do see that there's a Thief of Sanity as well. No Thought Erasure, which is one of the very important cards in the early turns because it can deal with any of the various threats that each player might bring to bear. There is possibility of just Swamp into Duress.
That's what we're going to see. You're going to see a hand of 2 Teferis. One of them is going to leave.
And this, importantly, does give Shahar the information about what's going on BBD's side. He knows, okay, well, there's a Thief of Sanity coming down. I'm going to need to try to find a way to deal with it myself. Does not find anything still. So we may see just Thief of Sanity in blocking.
Yeah.
Rarely seen Thief of Sanity combat.
Shahar's draw is a Hostage Taker.
Hostage Taker is a very good draw for Shahar here. He does have the Thief of Sanity that comes down, threatening to block. D-Spark cannot remove Thief of Sanity. So Brian Duin is going to offer the trade here, effectively, saying, okay, you can block, and if you don't, I get a card, so I expect we will see the block. And does say go. And I like that attack from BBD. He knows that he doesn't have removal, and he doesn't know whether Shahar has removal. So he is essentially put in a position where he says, okay, we can make this exchange, or there's the possibility that you have removal and I get blown out. And frankly, he would have been in some trouble against the Hostage Taker outside of that Spark.
Teferi Time Raveler will come down.
And Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, comes down for Brian Duin, and he's going to plus find himself another Thief of Sanity, but crucially, he does not have a Dovin's Veto. He has no way to stop this Teferi from coming down. He does have Despark, but can't cast it. Actually, Dovin's Veto wouldn't matter. There's still the Teferi.
There's a Teferi Time Raveler out there that's causing all sorts of trouble. That card is so powerful from War of the Spark, and it's on the battlefield. Starting to take over a little bit. Another Teferi here.
And crucially, Teferi can deal with Teferi. So, you know, the pair of Teferis for Shahar is much more powerful than the singleton Teferi for BBD. And reverse sends Teferi to deck. We do see the possibility of D-Spark on the Teferi Hero of Dominaria into a Thief of Sanity or a Narset. I'm curious to see which BBD does decide to play. Thief of Sanity is more powerful but more vulnerable.
Yeah, Thief of Sanity, the upside on this card is incredible because, again, if it does hit, it has a huge effect on the game. It's going to be the Thief. It's not going to live very long, as you see a handful of removal spells here for Shahar with an Oath of Kaya, a Hostage Taker, and a Vraska's Contempt. Curious to see which way Shahar wants to take care of this creature. Thief of Sanity is going to be... That's going to be taken hostage here by the human pirate.
And this is a really big deal because if BBD cannot remove the Hostage Taker, and he can't yet, he will Narset, and he can dig with the Narset. If he does not find a removal spell, not only he finds a Despark, but he'd love to be able to take Teferi or Liliana. But here, if he does not take this Despark and immediately remove the Hostage Taker, Shahar can cast the Hostage Taker that he is, or rather the Thief of Sanity that he's stolen with the Hostage Taker.
Yeah, but the question is, what's the higher upside play? And Brian believes the higher upside play here is Liliana Dreadhorde General, because Hostage Taker would come down, it would actually cast the Thief of Sanity, and then Liliana's Minus can take care of the two creatures. So this means that Shahar can't make what was such an obvious and powerful play any longer, or at least we don't think so as we head back to Shahar's turn.
Yeah, so from BBD's sort of thought process there, as you mentioned, was okay. Well, at least Liliana can deal with both of those. He is trying to put himself in a position where he's not just purely playing reactively, and he is threatening to put the pressure on with the Liliana itself as well. From Shahar's perspective, as you mentioned, he can't just play that Thief of Sanity now because it would just get eaten up by Liliana because he doesn't have counter magic to stop it from coming down.
So it's curious to see how Shahar wants to move forward here, and that's why this game is actually slowing down a little bit. Shahar's got some thinking to do. He's going to start with Teferi, going to plus there. Now he'll move towards Thief of Sanity off of the Hostage Taker. Okay, land, and now we're going to see Narset get knocked down to 1. So then we're going to go back to Brian. We know Brian has Liliana. Everybody knows it. You know it. Shahar knows it. We know it. Becca knows it. Everybody knows. Here's Liliana. It's going to come down, if I had to guess.
What mode would you use?
If I had to guess,
I would use Kill That Thief of Sanity.
Yeah, we're going to minus. Each player is going to sacrifice 2 creatures. So basically what this is, in my estimation, Brian, is Shahar saying, look, I got to get through this aspect of the game. This is going to happen. There's no way that this is not going to happen, so let's just let it happen. I have an answer to both Planeswalkers, and now I can move forward accordingly. Oath of Kaya is answer number 1. That's going to take care of Liliana.
Yeah, and we saw that he... actually, no, it's going to kill the Narset.
I'm a little surprised.
I am also surprised because I thought...
I am less surprised.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And he wants to hold on to the Vraska's Contempt in the event that a Teferi Hero of Dominaria comes down.
Sure.
He would not be able... Ooh, or the second Liliana. This is actually Shahar being extremely careful with his resources and recognizing what the major threats are that Brian could have. A lot of players, I think, might have just snapped off Vraska's Contempt, not thinking about the Teferi Time Raveler plus Oath of Kaya interaction. That allowed him to kill both the Planeswalkers and save that Vraska's Contempt, crucially for this Liliana.
And this Vraska's Contempt will take care of this Liliana, so the powerful Planeswalker will be exiled. Shahar will gain a little bit more life. He's up to 28. There's still a Teferi Time Raveler on the battlefield. Cry the Carnarium will take care of the token since it's not doing much else. However, as we take a look at both players' hands, not a ton going on here for Shahar, and Brian does have the ability to draw a good card. Mortify, not the best of the bunch, but I would say, Brian, that if we're looking at who's ahead here, it's close.
I do think it's close, but I think structurally Shahar is ahead because he has those Chemist's Insights he can draw into. He has, I think, more powerful individual cards. They're probably about even in terms of the powerful individual cards. But the ability for Shahar to find his is much higher at this stage of the game. He also just has the Teferi in play. And the Teferi means that so many of BBD's powerful cards are unlikely to be as impactful. If he picks up Dovin's Veto, that's done. But now there's Teferi on both sides.
Teferi is going to plus there for Brian. Part of the reason for that is if he were to minus it, maybe Oath of Kaya gets bounced again and finishes it off. So we're going to see Shahar bounce his Oath of Kaya and get to work on the Teferi.
Yep, Oath of Kaya does come down and get another card draw thanks to the Teferi minus ability. So BBD's Teferi does get chomped a bit. I guess stabbed. Chomped would be Soren. Stabbed is Kaya.
Whatever you want it to be there, flavor judge.
I'm just trying to think about the best way to describe what's happening here. It's not chomped. Soren chomps things. Kaya stabs things. She's the ghost assassin. Ooh, that's a big draw, though. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, comes down. And this is actually an interesting spot because BBD has that Dovin's Veto in hand. However, there's the Teferi Time Raveler in play for Shahar. So BBD could choose to tuck the Teferi Time Raveler so his Dovin's Veto is online to try to protect his Teferi. However, Shahar has a bunch of open mana. If he has a Vraska's Contempt, he could just play the Vraska's Contempt in response to this ability, so the Dovin's Veto would not be active anyway because Teferi Time Raveler would still be on the board.
Cry the Carnarium, the draw, not ideal. Here's Hostage Taker, again not ideal. This game is shifting. Before, it was a Teferi advantage for Shahar every step of the way. Now BBD has the Teferi advantage here, and he's looking to make the most of it. Now Dovin's Veto is on.
Another
Teferi
Teferi.
Time Raveler. Let's start with the big Teferi.
Yep.
Let's draw
Going
a card. Godless Shrine. Okay, sure. Let's go here. Minus bounce the Hostage Taker. Let's draw another card. Another land there in Drowned Catacombs. So not the best 1-2 punch as far as draw steps are concerned, but Brian's going to get to untap a couple of lands, still have up Dovin's Veto, and we move forward accordingly. Hallowed Fountain the draw there for Shahar. Here's Hostage Taker. I like how this is looking for BBD.
Yeah, you know, the stalemate they were at definitely went in BBD's favor here with the Teferi draw. And, ooh, there's Hero of Precinct 1. There is a Cry of the Carnarium in hand for Shahar Shenhar, and he also has the Teferi Time Raveler on the top of his deck. So he can play the Teferi Time Raveler next turn and be ensured that his Cry of the Carnarium can at least go off if he really wants to ensure that he is getting rid of this Hero of Precinct 1. Dovin's Veto will take care of Teferi.
Yep.
So no guarantee that Cry will work. But I think this is probably the best window you're going to get if you want to get rid of that Hero of Precinct 1 because your opponent is just drawing additional cards every turn thanks to Teferi Hero of Dominaria.
And even if Cry does work in this scenario, if you're BBD, you're still feeling pretty good about things, which I think is pretty nice because you still have these two active Planeswalkers kind of doing their thing, and Hostage Taker isn't that threatening right now. You're also looking at another copy of Teferi Time Raveler in hand and a Mortify to be able to kill something as necessary. So things are favorable here for Braun. There's the Cry. All right, we are going back to Brian. Another Precinct 1, not bad. Teferi going to tick up a little bit more, draw another card here. This draw step is crucial, just a Glacial Fortress, so not that great. Let's do the plussing of the other Teferi. Here's the Hero of Precinct 1. Curious if we'll see the other Teferi be played. It looks like the answer is no, but again, I'm liking Brian's positioning here in this game. He has turned the corner nicely. Shahar needs to draw some pretty good cards, and the Eldest Reborn is bleh.
I was actually a little skeptical of the fact that Shahar not only kept in Eldest Reborn, but it looked like he brought in a second copy during sideboarding. Well, Eldest Reborn is definitely a powerful card. When you're playing against a deck with Hero of Precinct 1 that can make 1/1 tokens, you're playing against a deck with Narset Parter Veils that can just have a useless Planeswalker on the board. There's going to be a lot of instances where the Eldest Reborn doesn't really do that much, at least on initial spellcast. However, it still sticks around in the other chapters going to go off, and possibly give Shahar another, well, not with Mortify.
I think the nice thing about the Eldest Reborn in this matchup is Chapter 3, where you get to get something back. If you ever get to that point, if you're actually able to kill Thief of Sanity with it, great. Hero of Precinct 1 is making it look quite poor in this instance. We're going to see a draw step Thought Eraser here, I believe, from Braun Duin because he plus Teferi Time Raveler. Wouldn't surprise me one bit. And here it comes.
Ooh, and it's going to hit the Narset. And that was a card that could have potentially dug Shahar out of this by finding some form of removal for the Teferi Hero of Dominaria.
That's a huge surveil to the top two in Dovin's Veto. That's a card that you're happy to draw. Draw steps are getting better here for BBD.
When you're behind to this degree in a game and your opponent scries or surveils to the top, it feels so bad. And there's another Thought Eraser, so Teferi Time Raveler giving Brian Braun Duin another peek during the draw step with the Thought Erasure. So even any spell here gonna go away.
Take that Thought Eraser.
And the combination of Thought Erasure plus Teferi Time Raveler not only means that you can get rid of any sorcery speed effect before they can play it, but they can't play spells other than as sorceries. So you get everything. Another one.
Well, let's keep it
this
going,
is just
right?
a nail, and they just keep making 1/1s as well with the Hero of Precinct one. This is just snowballing further and further. Narset means even a main phase draw of Chemister's Insight. Not going to work.
This is basically Time Walk making 1/1?
Yeah.
Is that what this basically is right now? It's pretty darn
and
good.
There's a Sorin.
4 Planeswalkers, huh? Yeah, 4. We're all
And
done.
there's the concession from
Yep.
Shahar Shenhar. He knows when he is beaten, and it will be Brian Braun Duin who is going to even up the series.
I think things get really good for Brian after sideboard. I really do. I think game 1 is really bad for him, but all these Planeswalkers and this counter magic and this interaction is really, really good for him. He kept a hand that wasn't very explosive because he knows the games are going to go long, so it's important to make sure you hit your land drops. Thief of Sanity trading in the early stages of the game, Brian doesn't really have any removal, so attacking his into Shahar's makes a lot of sense. The longer we went, and I said this in game 1, it favored Shahar. I'm not sure that's the case now against Brian. And you see Shahar's setup here too. Absorb, which was great in game 1. Those are in the board.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's so many different angles that he's being attacked by, one of which is the Teferi Time Raveler, which can make that just an absolute dead draw. It's also just expensive. You know, 3 mana.
You gotta worry about discard.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, too.
It becomes a lot less effective. I mean, I think that a lot of what we saw that game was just how powerful. Well, let's talk a little bit about Mulligan, then get back to that. We're going to see a Mulligan here, then a keep from Shahar as he mulligans a 1-land hand. Does have a pretty solid 2-land hand with a Thought Erasure to Teferi.
Boy, I like Brian's hand a lot, though.
Oh, yeah, Brian's hand is extremely powerful. He has the Duress to lead off. He's going to be able to take the Thought Erasure, which is the only playable card from Shahar's hand, which I would expect we do see, but he has a lot of options. And this will allow him to play out that Hero of Precinct 1 without any opposition. But crucially, I think a lot of what we saw in Game 1 was how the diversity of threats in BBD's deck made it difficult for Shahar to really keep up. Shahar spent a lot of that game with, he had the Hostage Taker, he had the Cry of the Carnarium. Those were not answering the current threats. Those were anti-creature cards while he was losing to Planeswalkers.
Here is Narset, our first Planeswalker of game number 3. That is going to minus here. We'll see if Shahar gets a card here. But, Hero Precinct 1 is not a card I expect to win the early stages of a game, but it can win the early stages of this game because Kaya's Wrath is ideally out of Shahar's deck. Makes a lot of sense why he'd sideboard that out. We're not looking at a creature-heavy matchup. And now Brian is able to maybe run away with this because now we got 2 must-kill creatures in the battlefield here in Thief of Sanity and Hero of Precinct 1, which is going to knock Narset down to 1, which means it's not going to do very much for the rest of the game.
And Oath of Kaya is the draw, so
that's a big one.
At least, a land would have been great too with the Vraska's Contempt. Is going to take out the Thief of Sanity. And now, this is actually an interesting spot for Brian because he does have the Narset he could play, but he also has the Dovin's Veto he can hold up to try to protect his board here. The Oath of Kaya, proving to do some damage here against the attacking creatures. Ooh, Narset finds Liliana.
I like going straight to Liliana.
Yeah.
That other card there, I believe, was a Thought Eraser, and that card is very powerful in the matchup. Shahar really needs a 4th land. Found a copy of Search for his Kanta, so going to miss his 4th land drop. But taking that Liliana, we saw how powerful it was in that second game to get Brian back into it. It might run away with this one, and Thought Eraser is a huge find off of Narset as here comes the attacks.
Yeah, and BBD gets in the damage, falls with Thought Erasure, going to make yet another creature with the Hero of Precinct 1, and takes the only interactive card that can be played with even another land draw. So now he knows that there has to be exactly a counterspell off the top, or Liliana is going to be able to come down next turn.
Yeah, and I love taking the Vraska's Contempt because it's an answer to things. Chemister's Insight when Narset's out there, not particularly good. Teferi, we're a little ways away from that. Liliana, we're a little ways away from that. So now we're going to head back over to Shahar, who found a Duress.
The Duress, but Dovin's Veto.
That's going to take care of that, and you get the 1-2 punch, right? You get Dovin's Veto, make a token, take care of the Duress, and now you've protected your Liliana, and you've got Mortify to take care of Search for his Kanta if it comes to that. BBD doing his thing right now.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Shahar is a little bit pinched on mana here, but Brian has just had such a powerful opening here that has been able to exchange his answers for all of Shahar's threats, all of his threats for Shahar's answers. So many ways that are really putting pressure on multiple angles.
Things have lined up beautifully here for Brian this game. You know, this is one of those games where, think about the last game where his first play, was Thief of Sanity into a much longer game. This one was 2, 3, 4.
Right.
You go hero into Thief, into something else, force the action. Shahar's answers and mana did not line up